Direction: in this section, you will hear an academic lecture. Listen to the lecture about the Battle of Chancellorsville. Take notes while you listen. Then answer questions 1 to 10. Today we will talk about the Battle of Chancellorsville. The Battle of Chancellorsville is one of the most famous battles of the Civil War that took place in Virginia in the spring of 1863. For months, the two armies had been staked out on opposite banks of a narrow river. The Confederate troops were led by perhaps the most revered military tactician in American history, General Robert E. Lee. The Union soldiers were led by Fighting Joe Hooker. In appearance, personality, and lifestyle, these men were nearly perfect opposites. Lee, an older man in poor health with a gray beard, had a sober, measured demeanor. Hooker was a blond, strapping young man whose vanity over his appearance was but one aspect of his egotism. Whereas Lee was devout and principled, Hooker was known for his rollicking enjoyment of both women and whiskey. Despite the fact that the Confederacy had won the last 4 major battles and the Union soldiers were famished, exhausted, and demoralized, Hooker proclaimed, "My plans are perfect. And when I start to carry them out, may God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I shall have none." Why, aside from a propensity for narcissism, was Hooker so confident? Hooker had used spies, analysts, and even hot air balloons to compile a vast amount of intelligence about Lee's army. He had discerned, for example, that Lee had only 61,000 men to Hooker's own 134,000. Buoyed by his superior numbers, Hooker covertly moved 70,000 of his men 15 miles up and across the river and then ordered them to sneak back down to position themselves behind Lee's army. In effect, Hooker had cut off the Confederate soldiers in front and behind. They were trapped. Satisfied with his advantage, Hooker became convinced that Lee's only option was to retreat to Richmond, thus assuring a Union victory. Yet Lee, despite his disadvantages of both numbers and position, did not retreat. Instead, he moved his troops into position to attack. Union soldiers who tried to warn Hooker that Lee was on the offensive were dismissed as cowards. Having become convinced that Lee had no choice but to retreat, Hooker began to ignore reality. When Lee's army attacked the Union soldiers at 5 p.m., they were eating supper, completely unprepared for battle. They abandoned their rifles and fled as Lee's troops came shrieking out of the brush. Bayonets were drawn. Against all odds, Lee won the Battle of Chancellorsville, and Hooker's forces withdrew in defeat. Now, that you have listened to the lecture, answer the following questions. 1. The Battle of Chancellorsville took place in Virginia in the A. Autumn of 1862, B. Spring of 1863, C. Winter of 1865, D. Summer of 1867. 2. General Lee's troops are called A. The fighting troops, B. The Chancellorsville troops, C. The Confederate troops, D. The Union troops. 3. The Union soldiers were led by A. Joe Hooker, B. General Robert E. Lee, C. Bobby Hooker, D. Joseph Lee. 4. In appearance, what made Lee different from Hooker? A. Lee was older than Hooker and in poor health with a gray beard. B. Lee was blond while Hooker had an auburn hair. C. Lee looked taller than Hooker. D. Lee was much younger than Hooker. 5. My plans are perfect. And when I start to carry them out, may God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I shall have none. The lecturer most likely includes this quote in order to A. Demonstrate Hooker's belief in his own infallibility. B. Reveal that Hooker was a deeply religious man in spite of his lifestyle. C. Foreshadows Hooker's defeat at the hands of Lee's army. D. Portrays Hooker as a merciless general who was compelled by his hatred of Lee. 6. How many men did Hooker position behind Lee's army? A. 61,000. B. 70,000. C. 73,000. D. 134,000. 7. What did Hooker use to compile a humongous amount of intelligence about Lee's army? A. He used the CIA, brave soldiers, and a paraglide. B. He used spies, activists, and helicopters. C. He used capitalists, analysts, and jet planes. D. He used spies, analysts, and hot air balloons. 8. According to the lecture, buoyed by his superior numbers, Hooker covertly moved 70,000 of his men 15 miles up and across the river. What does buoyed mean? A. Strengthened. B. Anchored. C. Sharpened. D. Heartened. 9. What did Lee do when he realized that he was outsmarted by Hooker? A. He moved his troops into position to attack. B. He and his troops retreated. C. Lee's forces withdrew in defeat. D. Lee hid his troops, afraid they might die. 10. The Union soldiers were attacked at A. 7 p.m. They were asleep. B. 5 p.m. They were eating supper. Circa 3 p.m. They were taking a nap. D. 6 p.m. They were preparing for their dinner. This ends our listening practice.